Hello, I'm Greg Hunter. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. We have back economist John Williams at Shadowstats.com. John Williams, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
Well, I know you're going to have something to say about this. I mean, the big announcement by the Fed on 12/12/12 that they're all in for quantitative easing. It's the $40 billion a month buying mortgage-backed security, and now $45 billion a month buying government debt with, no Operation Twist. If you watch the mainstream media, you would think that this was fine. Everything was good. And is everything fine? Is everything good?
Nope. This is, I've been looking for this to happen. What the Fed is doing here is it's really started open-ended monetization of the Treasury debt. And I'll contend that the economy is a lot worse than most people are looking at least officially. As this goes forward, you're going to see that we're in a new recession. Along with that, the budget deficit gets a lot worse than projected. Treasury funding needs get a lot worse than projected. U.S. Treasury is going to have problems with some of its auctions, and the Fed is there to prevent that from happening. They'll be there to be the lender of last resort to buy those treasuries. But in buying those treasuries, the Fed monetizes the debt. It creates money supply. It becomes very inflationary. This is going to be an early part of what will eventually be a hyperinflation. And where you're going to see the biggest reaction, I think, up front, when they actually start to monetize this debt, will be with the global trading of the U.S. dollar. You'll start to see very heavy selling of the U.S. dollar. But some people say, well, how does this monetize? How does this get into the money supply? How does the monetization of the treasuries actually hurt the economy or hurt the inflation outlook? What you have to consider is that with the U.S. Treasury, when it borrows money, let's say it wants to borrow $1 billion. If it's borrowing it from the public comes into the auctions, $1 billion is bought, checks are written out of the public checking accounts, goes to Treasury, that comes out of the money supply. The Treasury takes the funds, writes its checks that it sends out to the public, and there's a wash. You don't have a change. But when the Federal Reserve is the buyer, they're creating the money. They're not taking it out of the public accounts. So that when the Treasury sends it out, it goes new into bank accounts, and that's directly in the money supply, whether or not banks are lending, which is still a problem. You have a banking system here which is in trouble. And what you have to keep in mind is that the Fed, despite all the protestations to the contrary that what it's doing here is aimed at trying to reduce the unemployment rate, that's nonsense. If you listen to Bernanke's comment on 12/12 in his interview, he admitted that the Fed could not bring down the unemployment rate. There's nothing they can do to stimulate the economy. They're using the weak economy as cover, political cover. But this is largely something aimed at propping the banks and also setting up a methodology for supporting the federal government and the issuance of the treasuries. This will be very bad news down the road as people find their cost of living soaring, while at the same time their incomes are not.
So people really should be terrified with all this. My question to Ben Bernanke in a press conference would be, Mr. Chairman, what would happen if we just stopped this $85 billion a month money printing, 40 for the banks and $45 billion for buying government debt? What would happen if you just stopped that? And what do you think his answer would be, John Williams?
Well, I don't think he'd give you an honest answer. The answer comes from what they did in 2008, and they were faced with a panic and an outright collapse of the banking system. That's what they were afraid of. That's what they saw happening. They weren't kidding. You were starting to see a run on the U.S. banking system. Everything they've done since then has been aimed at trying to stabilize that. It hasn't worked. The banking system's still in trouble. The economy's still in trouble. And the Fed wasn't doing what it's doing here, in that it's primarily trying to prop up the banking system. I presume you'd be on the road towards a banking system collapse.
So if they didn't do this $85 billion a month, the banking system would collapse.
That's where it's heading. We still have problems in that area. If the banking system was healthy, they would be lending money in the normal course of business into the stream of commerce. They're not. They can't because their balance sheets are still impaired.
You know, they're talking about the fiscal cliff, and nobody's really talking about the real fiscal cliff. And that, aren't we talking about the debasement of the dollar and wrecking of the Treasury bond market? I mean, that's where we're headed? I mean, even David Stockman was on, last month in November on Fox, and he basically said the same thing to Neil Cavuto, that, eventually the dollar collapses. He was former White House budget director. The dollar collapses, the Treasury market collapses. I mean, isn't that what we're headed for? And then they have this fiscal cliff where they're talking about a couple of $1 trillion over 10 years. Erskine Bowles was $4 trillion over 10 years. I mean, what is this kabuki theater? I mean,
pretty close to it. They're not, whatever deal they come up with is not going to be of great substance in terms of balancing the deficit or balancing the budget, removing the deficit, and it has to be addressed. That's the biggest threat right now to the stability of the system. If you look at the deficit on a GAAP-based accounting, generally accepted accounting principles, the way large corporations look at their finances, we've been seeing a deficit running $5 trillion per year, not the $1 trillion or 1.1 trillion cash-based deficit they reported for this last year. I figure this last year was probably about $7 trillion. We'll have hard numbers on that in January. But that's almost beyond belief. It certainly is beyond containment. If a system is to be saved, you have to bring that into balance. And there's no effort here to bring that into balance, even to address it. I mean, if they cut a couple of trillion over 10 years, that's average is 200 billion a year. It's meaningless, and not only is it meaningless, but it's based on overly optimistic projections on the economy. If you look at the Congressional Budget Office, even with the damage done by the fiscal cliff, if we went over the cliff, they have the economy growing close to 5% in 2015. That's a booming economy. We're not going to have growth in 2015 of 5%. We're still going to be in a very protracted economic downturn. The difference is that the deficit is going to be enough worse that what they're cutting is really not going to be a cut against what they're forecasting. The word bad economy is going to make up the difference in terms of what they're cutting.
Because tax revenues are going to sink in 2013. Is that what I'm hearing?
Not only do tax revenues sink, despite there being higher taxes, but the government pays out a lot more in support programs. And I'm sure they'll put forth new stimulus packages. You have a variety of factors that combine so that when the economy is weak, the budget deficit generally widens.
Do you think they're going to get a quote-unquote fiscal cliff deal? And if they do, will it mean anything?
They're making a lot of noise about it. It sounds like they will, but you never know. The reason we're going through this is that the last deal they had didn't gel, and it really is anyone's guess. But if they don't do it, I think you're going to see very negative response in the global markets. Again, heavy selling pressure on the U.S. dollar. If they do it, you maybe have a month or two that they bought in terms of time with the global currency markets. But it's what they're discussing is not meaningful in terms of the big picture. It's all fluff.
John Williams, Shadowstats.com. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks again for having me, Greg.